Your attention, please. Ladies and gentlemen. First of all, congratulations to Phil on his brand new pair of tefillin. What? A shechiyanu? Yeah, we could probably.
Should we do it on the stone?
We could probably do it on the tefillin. Okay. Okay. Let's go, please, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin. Guys, come on. Today we're going to talk about philosophy and psychology of Judaism. Philosophy is often misinterpreted for Kabbalah, but they're very different, as we'll see. But we'll understand that more next week, because next week we'll talk more about Kabbalah. But in Hebrew, these terms are called Musar and Chakira. Chakira. The first text is going to be on page 186 for lesson number 5, which means there's today and then one more after that. One 186 is going to be your first text that we'll get to. So a Jewish philosopher and a French philosopher were sitting in a bar, because everything happens in a bar. The Jewish philosopher says to the French philosopher, "Do you know what's the difference between you and me? You are constantly thinking about God while I'm constantly thinking about myself." So the French philosopher is flattered. He says, "I thought you would say the opposite. I thought you would say you're always thinking about God." He says, "No." He says, "You don't ponder your existence because for you it's a given. You don't have to think about yourself. You know you exist. So obviously, you know you exist. You don't have to think about it. But you're not sure if God exists, so you're constantly thinking about God. Me, on the other hand, I'm not sure if I exist, but I know that God exists. So therefore, I'm always thinking about myself." Jewish philosophy is a very interesting concept. A lot of people don't really understand what it is or where it comes from. And today we're going to explore it. Some of what we learned today, you may have heard some similar ideas in the past, but it wasn't presented in a form of philosophy. So Musar, we're going to mix these two together. Musar is the body of Torah teachings that deals with ethics, character development, spiritual self-development, where Jewish philosophy is philosophy, right? It's as I said, it's called Chakira. On the face of it, they seem very different, but in many cases, they are very much intertwined. Number one, because a lot of the Jewish philosophers wrote Chakira as well, wrote Musar as well. And it's true that they are two distinct fields, but we're going to put these two genres together. As we've been talking about different genres, we're going to put them together because they do overlap in many ways. And as I said, many who are the authors of philosophy write books of Musar as well. These are some of the authors, the works of Musar. I think this is actually on a different page later on. We'll come back to this.
What does Musar mean?
Musar means ethics, character development, spiritual self-improvement. The word Musar literally means to chastise, but it means It means trying to refine yourself, becoming a better person. So the first question is that we really have to ask is, do we need philosophy? Do we need psychology? Right? Musar, maybe you could call it psychology of Judaism. Of course, everything is in the Torah. But as we talked last week, ultimately, when we talk about Judaism, it all boils down to action. That's why we had halakha. We talked about halakha. Ultimately, what do I do? We are a religion of action, of doing. We're not just about philosophizing. And being as it may, since we are about halakha, which means how we behave, not how we feel, not how we think, so then why would this be important? So, the Torah seems to focus primarily on behavior. However, we have to understand that Torah is also a holistic guide to life. It's not only telling us how to behave, but it also has to cover all areas in life. It has to enlighten our mind, it has to refine our character, and it has to talk to our inner soul. And that's why you need Musar, the human psychology of Torah, and Hakira, the philosophy of Torah. But the truth is that even when it comes to the laws of Torah itself, the halakha of Torah itself, these aspects also affect that. Why? So it's true, we have 613 mitzvahs. Many of them are instructions of what to do. However, there are mitzvahs that you need to have some sort of philosophy as well. Here are a few mitzvahs that are non-action Torah laws. Love your fellow as yourself. Now, of course, there's a lot of action involved with that, to do things for others. But when you have a commandment that says love, then you're talking to emotions. So how do you explain love? We have to love God as well. In addition, we have to try, and the Torah talks about not overindulging in materialistic pursuits, and to cultivate traits of joy and trust, simcha. When the Torah goes through the detail about the different curses, difficult part of the Torah to hear, and the conclusion is that this is because you didn't serve God joyfully. Well, how do you define joy? What does it mean to live joyfully? Many people could put on smiles, but it doesn't mean that they're actually happy. So what does it mean to live joyfully? It's an inner trait that you need to cultivate, you have to work on. So one of the greatest scholars when it comes to Jewish philosophy is the Rambam, Maimonides. Maimonides, we mentioned his name many times. As we mentioned, the Maimonides was the codifier of Jewish law. But he also has books on philosophy, and we'll soon explain why he wrote this book. And as a matter of fact, some of his writings within Jewish law itself cover these aspects of Musar and Chakira. Rambam has an entire section of his Jewish law known as the Hilchas Deis, the laws of, literally, the laws of knowledge. And he goes through detail, what is the proper way a person is to live their life, as to have a good character. He even goes through how to live medically, tells you what to eat, how to sleep. But he also goes through how to feel, how to associate with others. We're going to get to some of these towards the end of the lesson today. So it is intertwined with our law as well, because if we're just a very dry action-based, then we're missing out on the emotion aspect of it. We have to inspire our emotions as well. Our emotions are like the wings of the bird. You can have a bird, but in order for the bird to fly, you have to have wings. So the wings help inspire them, to help it move, to help it go. So every mitzvah that we do, and we mentioned the mitzvah of tefillin before. So it's true, if you just put on the tefillin and there's nothing more to it, you fulfilled the mitzvah. But then you also want to know what you're doing and why. So we have to be able to explain it, to understand it. Let's read text number 1. This is from Maimonides. Do not think, this is from the laws of Teshuvah, repentance, which is also, for the most part, an emotional-based mitzvah. Do not think that Teshuvah, repentance, is only for sinful actions. A person should also examine their negative character traits, anger, hatred, envy, frivolity, the pursuit of money and honor, gluttony, etc., and do Teshuvah for them as well. So, he's talking about the aspect of musar, that we have to work on our character. That is part of Teshuvah. So when we come to synagogue on Yom Kippur, and we mention all these things, and we say, I didn't do that, I didn't do that, I didn't do that.
That's a good one.
Well, think a little deeper. There's a lot of different forms of each of the different things that of the different sins, if you will. So it encompasses the teachings that bring out the character traits and utilize a philosophical self-development program guided by Torah values. Now, we have self-improvement and character refinement also within the Torah goals. But why do we need so that's important, that you want to have the emotions, but why do we need philosophy? Why is philosophy important? And of course, many people think, when it was first introduced, and we could talk a whole lesson about the history of philosophy, which we'll get to a little bit. But why is it something important? Perhaps it's not good. Maybe we shouldn't think about things too much. Maybe we shouldn't talk about questions like good and evil, freedom of choice, the purpose of life. Well, it's considered a part of the Torah, and there's a number of reasons why it should be part of what we study as the philosophy. First of all, we have certain mitzvahs that deal with feelings and character traits, but there's also certain mitzvahs that require a philosophical understanding in order to fulfill them. The very first mitzvah, or one of the mitzvahs of the Ten Commandments, the very first mitzvah of the Ten Commandments is, I am the Lord your God. And then later on we read in Deuteronomy, V'yadata hayom v'ashavayis alevacha, you shall know today and bring to your heart. It's a mitzvah to know God. Yedias Hashem, to know God. Just one problem. How can you know God if you don't think about what God is? How can you love God? How can you fear God? These are mitzvahs in the Torah. So it's part of action, but actions that can't be done in a physical way. They can only be done in a philosophical way. Let's look at text number 2. Rabbi Yeshaliyahu Halevi Horowitz, Shnei Luchas Abris. The Torah states, you know today and bring unto your heart that God is the God. We're on page 188. That is to say that God is an in-depth knowledge with logical proofs, in addition to the tradition received from our ancestors. This alluded to the verse, know the God of your fathers, meaning to say, in addition to the faith established in your heart by your fathers, by the tradition handed down through the generations, you should also know on your own, by means of your own understanding. This is alluded to the verse, this is my God, and I shall beautify him, the God of my fathers, and I shall exalt him. That is to say, when he is my God, due to my own knowledge and understanding, then ve'anvehu, I shall beautify him, which also can be read as a combination of the words ani vahu, I and him. Meaning I and he are bonded together, so to speak, because my knowledge of him is internalized in my heart. However, when I do not possess a knowledge of God that is a product of my understanding, only the tradition that he is the God of my fathers, then I shall exalt him. God remains aloof and elevated from me, and I am distant from him in the inner recesses of my heart. A person is therefore obligated to be well versed in the logical proofs cited in Chavat HaLevavos, which that is a book of Musar, that is to be well understood in the heart, to know and understand that God is one and he is one. So if you want him to be my God, right? Herman Wouk, My God. You ever read the book My God, Herman Wouk? Said yeah. Someone said yeah. You've heard of it, okay? Yeah. I'm Herman Wouk spoke by my bar mitzvah.
Really? Wow.
I had a bar mitzvah in Israel, and he came. He was very good friends with my grandfather, and he came, and he spoke by my bar mitzvah in my grandparents' synagogue, the Hef synagogue in Jerusalem. I actually have a recording of it. And then I got a gift, one of his books. I'm not sure if it was My God, but I got a gift, one of his books that was signed by him. So, Honey Badger? I don't know if that's the one. I don't have that one. Yeah. Yeah. So I have one of his autographed books. Anyway, so he wrote a book, My God. But what is the idea of My God? We say it. We say it in our prayers every day. In the Az Yashir, in the song of the sea, which we read every day. Zek Heli, this is my God. V'an Veu, and I will beautify him. Also comes the word Ani Vahu. I am him. Elokei Avi, but if it's the God of my father, Vayramenu, and I will exalt him. What's the difference? You know, many people come to me and say, I don't know, when I grew up, my parents just said, you do it because you have to do it. How many people come to me and say that? Right, just do it, don't ask questions, that's it. Because this is what I tell you to do. Fregnish, right? Fregnish. So, that's Elokei Avi, that's the God of my fathers. There's a certain element to that as well. Accepting is also important. But if you want to be my God, meaning if you want to be meaningful to me, then you have to work on that. You have to try and learn, you have to try and study, and you have to try and grow internally and personally, and that's what we're doing here. So belief is very powerful. It's important to have belief. It's important to just do things because this is the way I have to accept it. But then there's another element to trying to understand ourselves. So, another aspect of it, that it helps in our efforts to transform our emotions and character. Text number 3. It is written, you shall love God, your God. But love is a feeling in the heart. How can it be commanded? One who loves God loves. But what should a person do if this love is not embedded in their heart? God forbid. How can the Torah say in a manner of a command, you shall love, as if a person has a choice in the matter? But the commandment is regarding the contemplation described in the preceding verse. Hear, O Israel, God is our God, God is one. Hebrew word Shema here also means understand. That is why it says you shall love as an imperative, as the commandment is to contemplate and understand. So when you say love, what do you mean love? How could I love? You can't command to love. Love means that you have to do what you could do intellectually to love. The concept of fall in love. I don't really believe in that fall in love. Because fall in love is not really, you're not really loving the person until you really get to know them. You could love certain aspects of them. Maybe you like the way they look, maybe you like the way they smile, but do you like them as a person? You have to really get to know them. And that could take time. That could take years until you really get to know a person in a marriage for love. So when you talk about love, you have to first understand who they are in order to love them. Same thing is, if you want, we talk about loving God. Well, you have to know, you have to learn God, you have to understand God in order to love God, at least to the best of our ability, which is why we had a course, My God, last one. So, the same is true about our internal emotions and character traits. If we want to feel something, we have to understand it. It's a deep transformation that we have to do within ourselves. So present the philosophical parts of Torah in a systematic way. And this is another aspect of why we see that these sort of work together. The Chakira is a systematic, rational, digestible way in order to help us to work on our character traits as a person in general and as a Jew particularly. Now the truth is that this really began, the concept of philosophy began with a Jew named Philo, right? Philo, that's where the word philosophy comes from, Philo. Right? He was Jewish, right? Was he Jewish? Yeah, he was Jewish. Yeah. He began to teach it, and in the beginning it wasn't something so really much accepted by the Jewish community. But as time went on, what happened was Jews that were living in mostly Muslim communities, because the Muslims were much more into philosophy than the Christians, and the Muslim communities were very intrigued by the concept of philosophy. And what ended up happening was that many Jews were starting to be influenced by their Muslim neighbors. They were living essentially a very good life under Islam. The Christians did not make it so easy for them, and then especially when you talk about what happened in Spain and in other countries. So eventually you had certain scholars. This is as a side to what we're talking about. This is also a little bit of historical context to understand what ended up happening. That a lot of Jews were, until now, were just living their life as a Jew, as a Torah Jew, based on halacha, simple halacha, and very dry law and mitzvahs the way it was, and this is what the community practiced. And then suddenly you have these philosophers starting to bring in these ideas, this enlightenment, and so many Jews became very confused by that. And so there had to be some sort of balance. And that is when certain of the early halachic codifiers at the time, one of them being Reb Sadia Gaon, another who we mentioned the time of the Gaonim, we mentioned them last week. They were right before the codifiers. Then you had the Rambam, and the Rambam wrote a work called, I'm sure you've heard of it, called The Guide to the Perplexed. Well, what was the reason that he wrote this book? Because there were Jews that were confused, and they were seeing contradictions between the Torah and philosophy. And so therefore, he needed a response to them. He needed something to show them that Torah has its own philosophy, and that things could be explained rationally. And so the Rambam went on to write these books, as did others. They wrote on books of Hakira as a response to what was going on to the Jewish communities at the time. And so you also had this pragmatic reason for it, where the Hakira began to emerge, simply because we were losing the Jewish community to philosophy. Jews were falling into it by the droves. By the way, I mean, you go on a little tangent here, but this also explains why the whole idea of the Spanish Inquisition, why did so many fall to the Marranos? In other words, why didn't they just put up their hands and give up their lives? Instead, they chose to go as Marranos and undercover, and a lot of it had to do with the philosophy at the time, because the philosophy affected the way they were thinking as individuals, that they were able to philosophize everything, and they were constantly explaining everything in their mind, saying how everything is okay, and they were philosophizing everything. So that had an effect on it too.
What was their choice?
It wasn't typically something that Jews did, to say that they're going to live silently, or to give themselves up. The final question of what was their choice. You live to a Jew at the end, till the very end. But this idea of figuring out a way to live both worlds, a lot of it had that effect. But anyway, I don't want to get carried away by this. But the point is that historically there was a big effect, and the reason that the Rambam wrote the book, Guide for the Perplexed, was because people were confused and they were lost. People were lost, and they were having mostly their Muslim neighbors coming and showing them all this beautiful philosophy, and they didn't have a response. And so the Rambam had to say, yes, we have a response to that. There is a Torah version of that too. Musar also was in a response that came much later. We're talking about the 19th century when the Musar movement was developed. But that was also a response to the Enlightenment, which was taking place during that time. And you had the yeshivas, which were developing in Europe, and they were losing students, hundreds of students in the droves, to the Enlightenment movement, and they started going off to college and to universities or whatever. And so they needed to have something to present to them to say that we also have our sense of enlightenment as well in Judaism. And that's when the Musar started to come about. Eventually that developed into Hasidus, but that was a little bit different. But we'll talk about that next week. Okay. Now we're going to do the video, which is going to go through the history of everything here. You have it on your page. You can pull out your map, and you can also follow along in your student page 192. This will help you. You'll be able to follow along with the video, so you won't be completely lost with what's being explained in the video.
Like spring water gushing with inspiring force, diverging into multiple rivers the further it travels, so do the Torah's wisdoms and insights branch into multiple streams of thought the further the Jews travel with it on their journey through time. Let's take a look at two of those streams, whose courses run parallel and often intersect. Musar, a Hebrew term for restraint or discipline, has been used since biblical times to refer to ethics, character cultivation, and spiritual self-improvement. Musar is the field of Torah psychology. Chakira, a Hebrew term for investigation, is used for the intellectual probing of Judaism's ideology and theology. Chakira is the field of Torah philosophy. These twin wisdoms are woven throughout the narratives and teachings of the Tanakh, including the Ten Commandments, which are diverse in genre. King Solomon drew extensively from their waters to compose the biblical book Mishlei, Proverbs, which provides observations on human nature and guidance for an intellectual, moral, and righteous life. He also produced Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, on the meaning of life and human pursuits and the role of religion. Another biblical book, Iyov, the book of Job, investigates human suffering, the existence of evil, and the limitations of theology. Insights into Torah psychology and philosophy filter into the discussions of the Talmud. In fact, the Mishnah devotes much of the tractate Avos to ethical conduct. But the divergence into independent fields of Torah exploration with scholarly publications exclusive to these two genres occurred in the 10th century. At that time, the primary centers of Jewish life and scholarship were located in Arabic-speaking countries, where academia had flourished for centuries. For that reason, the initial works of Jewish ethics and philosophy were written in Judeo-Arabic. But in the 13th century, with the decline of Arabic civilization and the academic shift to Europe, Hebrew again became the primary language in which Jewish books were composed. Rabbi Sadia Gaon was a prominent rabbi and author who lived in Egypt, the land of Israel, and Babylon. His book, Beliefs and Opinions, is the earliest known organized presentation of Torah philosophy and theology. Rabbi Shlomo ibn Gabirol of Spain wrote on philosophy, ethics, Kabbalah, and Hebrew literature. His Font of Light is a classic in Jewish and Islamic ethical philosophy. Rabbi Bachya ibn Pakuda of Spain penned the first systematic work of Jewish ethical philosophy that later inherited the title of its Hebrew translation, Chavot Halavovot, Duties of the Hearts. Its 10 gates explore unity of God, providence, worship, trust, sincerity, humility, repentance, self-examination, asceticism, and love. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi of Spain, one of Jewish history's greatest poets and liturgists, crafted Kuzari, one of Judaism's premier theological presentations, couched as a dialogue between an 8th century rabbi and a Khazar king who converted to Judaism. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, the universally acclaimed Maimonides, produced Guide for the Perplexed while living in Egypt. The work leans on Aristotelian and classical Arabic philosophy to explain Judaism's fundamental principles. Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid of Germany, a founder of the Hasidei Ashkenaz ascetic movement, wrote the ethical Sefer Hasidim, Book of the Pious. A brilliant but anonymous rabbinic author living in Barcelona produced Chinuch, Book of Education, recording reasons for each of the 613 biblical commandments, with the ethical lessons they convey. Rabbi Yonah Garondi of Spain authored several moralistic works, including the famous Sha'arei Tshuva, Gates of Repentance. Rabbi Levi ben Gershon, known as Ralbag, or Gersonides, was a French philosopher, mathematician, astronomer, scientist, and inventor. He wrote a philosophical treatise, Milchamot Hashem, God's Battles, and a Bible commentary that drew philosophical, ethical, and legal conclusions from the narrative. Derashot Haran, the Discourses of Rabbi Nissim Garondi of Catalonia, explores elemental ideas in Jewish philosophy such as creation, free choice, prophecy, chosenness, nature and miracles, mitzvot, and Torah learning. An anonymous author published Orchot Tzadikim, Ways of the Righteous, a collection of ethical teachings that became a classic of the Musar library. Rabbi Chiste Kreskas of Saragossa wrote Or Hashem, God's Light, to defend classical Jewish theology in the face of the Aristotelian philosophy favored by medieval Jewish scholars. Rabbi Yosef Albo of Spain penned a classic of Torah philosophy, Ikarim, Fundamentals, which emphasizes 3 pillars of Jewish belief: God's existence, the Torah's divine origin, and reward and punishment. Rabbi Eliyahu Davidas of Tzfat, a disciple of master Kabbalist Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, wrote a moral, mystical work named Reshit Chachma, Genesis of Wisdom. Rabbi Yehuda Loewy, known as Maharal of Prague, was one of the greatest sages of his era. Several schools of Torah philosophy are based on or derived from his many works. Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, or Ramchal, of Italy and Holland, authored many books on Kabbalah, philosophy, ethics, poetry, including an ethical classic, Mesilat Yesharim, Path of the Upright. Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, a protege of the Vilna Gaon and founder of the Volozhin Yeshiva that produced several leading Torah scholars of the next century and a half, composed the philosophical and Kabbalistic Nefesh HaChaim, Soul of Life. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch lived in Germany and founded the Torah im Derech Eretz approach to Judaism, advocating a symbiosis of Torah learning with secular sciences and engagement with the modern world. He wrote philosophical and psychological insights on the biblical narratives, authored Horeb, a philosophical exploration of the mitzvot, and 19 letters on Judaism, a work of philosophical defenses of the Jewish faith. Rabbi Yisrael Lipkin of Lithuania, known as Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, founded the modern Musar movement that invited fresh emphasis on ethical behavior, character refinement, and self-improvement in the European bastions of classical Torah study. Various schools emerged within this movement, including the Kelm school founded by Rabbi Simcha Zissel Ziv, which emphasized orderliness, thoughtfulness, and dedication. The Slobodka school of Rabbi Natan Tzvi Finkel, focusing on the human striving for perfection. And the Novardik school of Rabbi Yosef Yozel Horowitz, which emphasized trust in God, humility, and self-effacement. The movement became a lasting cultural and educational phenomenon, drawing on earlier ethical classics while offering original contributions to the library of Jewish ethics. Many of its prominent rabbis emphasized specific methodologies. For example, its founder, Rabbi Salanter, focused on identifying personal strengths and weaknesses and confronting a weakness head-on. Rabbi Ziv emphasized thinking before acting. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Leib Bloch taught Jewish philosophy-based ethics. Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman focused on integrity of thought and belief. Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz focused on the uniqueness of each individual. Rabbi Eliyahu Eliezer Dessler's ethical and philosophical insights were colored by Kabbalistic and Hasidic teachings. His teachings are preserved in the Musar classic Michtov Me'Eliyahu, Letter from Eliyahu. Rabbi Shlomo Wolba focused on education and individual growth. Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan of Radin, Belarus, a foremost halachist, ethicist, and mentor of 19th and 20th century Eastern European Jewry, is better known by the title of his first publication, Chafetz Chaim, Desire's Light, a digest of laws relating to ethical speech. Rabbi Abraham Yitzchak Kook, modern Israel's first Ashkenazic chief rabbi, crafted works on Jewish thought and law with a distinctive philosophical, mystical, and poetic style. They are the ideological underpinnings for religious Zionism. Rabbi Joseph Ber Soloveitchik of Boston was a Talmudist, a philosopher, and a seminal figure of modern Orthodox Judaism. He led the rabbinical seminary at New York's Yeshiva University, and his philosophy was preserved in numerous articles and talks, including 2 landmark essays, The Lonely Man of Faith and Halachic Man.
While we were watching this, I just ran to pull out a few of these books that we have in our shelf. I don't have them all. Here's the Rambam, The Guide to the Perplexed. It's Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, that many of you have seen. This is the Kuzari. He mentioned Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, which is a dialogue between the sage and the king. Duties of the Heart, Chavas HaLevavos. This is another one. So I don't have all the books mentioned here on our shelf, but we do have some of them. Let's continue. So what we're going to do now, instead of focusing so much on the history and the what is, we basically went through a general idea of what the Musar and Chakira is. What we're going to do now is we'll actually study 3 primary subjects in the view, in the eyes of Musar and Chakira. The first one is going to be creation. The second one is going to be bitachon, which means trust in God. And the third one is going to be idea of anger management. So these are three subjects that we'll look at from the eyes of Musar and Chakira. The first one is creation. Now, if you've ever prepared a speech or written an article, you know that it's very important to make sure that your opening words are done right. You have to work on your opening words. So that being said, the book of the Torah begins like this. In the beginning, God created heavens and earth. Is that a line that you would begin your book with? Maybe yes, maybe no. Huh? Sounds catchy? Okay. We mentioned about the Septuagint, with the 72 rabbis who translated the Torah, and they actually, this was another verse that they mistranslated, deliberately mistranslated. Right, David? Because they didn't want it to be translated as Bereshit bara Elokim, which means the beginning created God. That's the literal translation of it. The beginning, Bereshit bara Elokim, the beginning created God. So it was translated as Elokim bara Bereshit, God created the beginning. So, but this is the way it's translated. Well, we translate it as in the beginning, God created heavens and earth. But the word Bereshit just means in the beginning, right? So the philosophical and psychological aspects of this have many questions. Well, the first question is, why do we talk about creation at all? Why does the Torah have to talk about creation? Isn't it a book of laws? Does the book of laws have to talk about creation? And as a matter of fact, Rashi, the foremost commentary in the Torah, asks this question immediately. Text number 5. The Torah ought to begin with the verse, "This month shall be for you," in Exodus, which is the first mitzvah commandment to the Jewish people, to the people of Israel. The mitzvah of the new moon, which is Rosh Chodesh, is this week. Rosh Chodesh, the first mitzvah. Why then does the Torah begin with, "In the beginning, God created heavens and earth"? So, we've talked about this in previous courses, but this is just giving a history. And you could say, okay, well, we need to know the history of our people. But the Torah is not just a historical account. The Torah is a lesson. And it's there for us to understand and learn how we can better our lives. So why is this important? What is the primary purpose of instructing us for our lives to know about the creation of heavens and earth? So the truth is that if you're simply taking Torah from a halachic perspective, then it's really difficult to explain. Now Rashi does give a halachic per se response to it. And what he says there is that it's in order that we should know that if people are going to say that the land of Israel is their land, you should know that God created the earth and gave it to whoever he wants. But if we take a look at it from a philosophical and ideological perspective, then is this the most appropriate statement? This is very appropriate. We're going to take a look at Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. We mentioned him in the past. He lived in Spain, also known as the Ramban. And he says like this. This is a Midrashic teaching, page 196. This is a Midrashic teaching that Rashi cites in the commentary, but can we question this? Indeed, there is a great need to begin Torah within the beginning God created. And this is the very root of our faith. One who does not believe this and thinks that the world always existed denies the very basis of Judaism and has no Torah at all. Okay, so it sounds like, to us, a relatively fundamental comment saying that it's important to know, to realize that that it wasn't that everything always existed. Now they say a little girl came to her mother and says, "Mom, where do we come from?" And she says, "Well, we believe that God created heavens and earth, and then He created Adam and Eve, and then they had children, and they had children, and that's where we come from till today." She said, "Well, I went to Dad, and he said that there was a development from animals to monkeys to humans, and then eventually we came about. So how come he said something different?" So she said, "Well, he's telling you his side of the family." So, okay, so we have to take a step back to really understand where the Ramban is coming from for this comment, because this is really a loaded comment that he's saying. Who's perhaps the most famous philosopher? Sydney, who's the most famous philosopher you could think of? Aristotle, right? Aristotle. I mean, there's others, but Aristotle will be one of the most famous philosophers. And he was already around even BCE. He's been around for a while, Aristotle, right? So he was one of the creators of the whole philosophy, and you have to understand that when you're talking about the world of Greek and Roman culture, it's like philosophy was the Bible. This was everything. Philosophy was it. Today, you have science, which is very much respected. But if you want to say that someone is wrong, if you're saying Aristotle is wrong, it's like saying, within science, let's say, saying Einstein was wrong, or Darwin was wrong. The most respected scientists of today, back then their science was philosophy. And so when you want to go to the great minds and say that one of the greatest minds was wrong, didn't know what they're talking about, this was a bold statement. Now the truth to be told is, a lot of the Hakira did have similarities to Aristotle, and many people believe that some of the Jewish philosophers, the Rambam, Maimonides, studied Aristotelian philosophy and followed a lot of it and agreed with a lot of it. And you could say that perhaps it affected a lot of the philosophy that was within Judaism as well. And many believe that Aristotle did believe in God, but there was one area that all of the Jewish philosophers said that Aristotle is wrong. This is Reb Sadia Gaon, Maimonides, Nachmanides, all of them said that he's wrong. And that is that regarding the existence of the world. And Aristotle believed that the world always was, because he had difficulty believing that God created from nothing to something. In other words, he didn't have difficulty believing in a creator, he had difficulty believing in creation, what we call me'ayin liyesh, from nothing to something. So they insisted that not only can we explain it in a Jewish way, the idea of that God created heavens and earth, but there's also a logical explanation to it. And that is where Hakira, that is where philosophy comes in, to explain it in a philosophical way, meaning that we could logically prove God's creation. Text number 7. In other words, to put it this way, Aristotle didn't have a problem with God's existence. He had a problem with God creationism, as we'll call it. Let's take a look at text number 7. It's from Reb Saadia Gaon, who we mentioned before, beliefs and opinions. God tells us in the Torah that all things were created from nothing, created by Him from the prior state of non-existence, as is written in the beginning. God created. It also says, I am God who makes everything. This truth was corroborated for us with signs and miracles, and we therefore accepted it. I then contemplated this truth, asking, can this be verified by logic? Okay, remember, by logic as verified by prophecy. All right, it's easy to say, this is the prophecy, this is what we know, this is what we believe. But the problem is you're talking to Jews that are affected by Aristotle. So you have to respond to them. So he says, I found that it is from a number of angles. The first proof is from the finiteness of the universe, because we know that heavens and earth is a limited size. Their potential must also be limited, as a finite object cannot possess an infinite potential. Because the energy that sustains their existence is finite, they must have a beginning and an end. A second proof is from the particularization and complexity of the universe. I observe how every entity is comprised of the interconnected parts and complex components, revealing to me the imprint of their maker and the creator. I found that this too is stated in the verse, when I see your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you arrayed. And this is talking then, imagine what we have with the scientific explorations today, the things that we're learning about the earth and the powers and the energy that we know today. It was within every blade of grass and every drop of sand. So the earth itself says that there needs to be a creator. So this is his two proofs, again, from a philosophical perspective. If you want to say that I can explain it in a way that it should be logical. And he cites more proofs, the finite nature of time, and the world's constantly changing and evolving. But the point is that up until that time, there wasn't a lot of explanation for the Jewish community to respond to these beliefs. Now, up until the 20th century, you could say many secular physicists would not have agreed with the statement of Reb Saadia Gaon. Today, however, you could say that most people actually do believe it. The idea of creation. Okay, they may call it something else. They may call it the Big Bang Theory, or some other words. But ultimately, they're basically saying there needs to be a beginning. That's the idea. Okay, if you insist that there can't be today, they're saying that there's a creation, there's a beginning, but there's no God. Back then, Aristotle said there's a God, but there's no beginning. But the point is that here you have an example of how they responded to that. So a few before we continue on, let's just take a look at this. Number one, all miracles have a natural explanation. This is another explanation to this. According to creationism, for miracles, God disregards his natural way of running the world. So that's another reason that was given as a... Sorry, let me go back for a second. I'm running on myself. Huh?
When you say Aristotle said there is no beginning, does he mean, where did God come in then? That's what I'm confused with what you're saying.
He basically said that God's existence always was, and the world's existence always was. Yeah. Now, you have to remember something. Next week we're going to talk about Kabbalah. Okay, Kabbalah talks beyond logic. So we can't confuse. The philosophy could only go as far as the human brain understands. So he'll say, we believe and we understand that the world always existed, that God always existed, But that's as far as we can go. We can't really explain how it actually started. But we just know that it was always there. Yeah.
But was there a world before God, maybe in the beginning, like the cavemen and the dinosaurs and that? Did that happen before? And then God said, I'm going to start all over again? I mean,
You're asking according to Torah or according to Aristotle?
according to Rabbi Hex.
Did cavemen exist? Maybe Adam was a caveman. I mean, the Torah doesn't deny that there was such a thing as cavemen, but we do believe that the first man was Adam and Eve. That's according to Torah. Could there have been dinosaurs? There could have been dinosaurs. It doesn't say anywhere that there wasn't dinosaurs. We believe that there were very big creatures before the flood, especially. So there may have been dinosaurs. There may have not been dinosaurs. We don't know.
But they find bones and stuff.
Okay. So the bones could be from creatures. Who says that those bones were 10 billion years old? Maybe they were only 5,000 years old. They put a date on it, they put a time on it, and
We don't know how 1 million years was either.
well, there's a lot of explanation to this, but that's not really the point here. The point here is that philosophy, based on Aristotle and some of the others, presented things in certain ways that Judaism had to respond to. Now, what I want to get to over here is not so much what the actual philosophy is, but the question is, why does it matter? Why is it important? Why is it important to say that as Nachmanides said before, that the reason that the Torah has to begin with, in the creation God created heavens and earth, is, as he says in his words, one who does not believe this and thinks the world always existed denied the very basis of Judaism and the Torah at all. Why does it matter? Why does it matter if you believe when the world was created? And so the problem is like this. Let's assume that I'm living in Nachmanides' generation about 800 years ago. I'm a man of science, and I believe that the universe always existed. And I believe that God is the primary mover of the universe, and that God affects the universe. Why does it matter that I believe that God actually created the universe? So the problem is like this. The problem is that if the world always existed, then that means, number one, that things are not, there's nothing that is eternal. The real God, the idea that the idea that there is something that we could change, that there's change in the world, that we have the power to affect the world, that we have the power to do good in the world. If you're saying that it's something that always existed and it's immutable and it's absolute, and that God is the same, and that God doesn't have any control over the world, right, which is essentially what they're saying, then it doesn't empower God, number one. Doesn't say that God has the ability to make any change. Doesn't say that God has the ability to have an effect on the world. But it also means that we don't, because part of what we're believing is that we as humans, God gives us free choice, and God gives us the ability to make a positive change in the world that He created. And God gives us that partnership, if you will, in the creation of the world. And so, if you want to look at yourself and say, do I really mean anything? Does my existence really mean anything? Well, if you want to say that God's existence doesn't mean anything, and there is no really change in the world, there's no effect in the world, then how can we look at ourselves and say that we mean something? Are you following what I'm saying? Let's take a look at text number 8. The belief in a pre-existing world. This is from Maimonides' Guide to the Perplexed. You wanted to study the Guide to the Perplexed? Here's a cutout from it. The belief in a pre-existing world as viewed by Aristotle, in which everything that is must be, nothing changes its nature, and nothing acts contrary to its custom, This view contradicts the very basis of our faith, denies every miracle, and negates all that Torah strives for and or warns against. Okay, just remember again, this is talking about, Maimonides is saying, Aristotle. It's like saying that anything that Einstein said, that Einstein's basis, his theory, is wrong, and it's hard to say that to Jews that are very deeply embedded in this belief. But anyway, he says, know that with this belief of a created world, all miracles are possible. The Torah is possible, and all challenges to these truths are answered. For should you ask, why did God communicate his prophecy to this one and not to the other? Why did he command these particular mitzvahs and prohibitions? What is the divine intent with these instructions? Why did God not inspire these actions and prohibitions in our nature? If this is the behavior that he desired, the answer to all these questions is, so God desired, and so is wisdom deemed, in the same way that it was desired by God to create this world in a particular manner. But if we were to believe that the world is the way it is because it could not have been any other way, then all these questions would necessarily arise, and they could only be answered with weak and unsatisfactory replies. So, oh my God. No. 1 second. I thought this was charging the whole time, and lo and behold, it was not. 1 second. Okay. So, what is Maimonides saying? He's saying that we have two versions of reality. You have the Aristotelian version of reality, which is that essentially everything always existed, the world is what it is, God is what it is, and there's nothing that we could change. There's nothing that's meaningful. The behavior that we do, why certain people have certain tasks, why certain people have prophecy, why certain things happen, there's really no meaning to any of it. Because the world always was, and that's the way it is. But the Torah model of creationism says that the laws of nature and the laws of reality are in existence with a divine purpose. God created it with a purpose, with a reason, and therefore God dictates what happens in the world. Therefore miracles have meaning. Therefore our life has meaning. So we share this divine power, and God gives us a soul which is a part of God, and saying that you have it as well. You also have the ability to change the world, to affect the world. We are God's partners in creation. But if you say that the idea of God and creation don't exist, then none of this really matters. So let's take a look here. Aristotelian view. All miracles have a natural explanation, but creationism says, for miracles, God disregards his natural way of running the world. Aristotelian view says, our choices are all part of inborn nature. Creationism says we are created in the image of God, and therefore can make our own moral choices. And finally, future change is all an outgrowth of the present reality, where creationism says our praise and actions have the power to change the way things are. Good? So this is one aspect of Chakira and Musar. Now we're going to go to the next concept. Bitachon. Yeah.
Would you say that the last open change, future change, is all account growth of these things?
One second.
You look at prayers and our own actions, aren't they similar in ways, would you say?
Prayers, I'm not sure what you're saying. Prayer is change?
Well, prayers can foster change.
Okay. Okay.
And our actions. And an outgrowth, isn't that an action in a way?
An action, and therefore what?
Is all an outgrowth. I differ with the old. But a future change, but an outgrowth, isn't that a change per se on something?
I'm not following. The change.
She's referring to that.
Huh?
Hope and change. And I'm looking at.
Hope and change. Future change is all outgrowth of the present reality. So, yeah. So what are you trying to say? So prayer.
That prayer and your actions, they're similar. I didn't say they're the same, but there is a similarity. They're similar in ways. Prayers and actions.
I'm sorry. I'm just not following.
So, you act in a certain way, and then there it is, it proceeds from there,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Prayers and your actions,
Okay. Have an effect.
that is correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. So what's the question?
Are they similar in your opinion?
To what?
These two philosophies, exactly what you're talking about.
Right. Are they similar to what? I'm just not understanding.
The two
Are
time
they
references.
similar to each other?
The two bottom ones, are they similar?
The sheet for question is, are they similar?
Are the prayers and the actions similar to each other?
Well, we're trying to explain the difference between them.
I know you are, but
It's-
what I'm trying to say is, I can see a similarity.
Because
The
we're using the word.
Future outgrowth is forget hope and change. Forget that side. Future change is an outgrowth of the present reality. In other words, whatever it is, that's what it's going to be. We can't affect it. That's what that means. This means we could. Our prayers and actions have the power to change the way things are.
But the way it was written, it's an interesting.
Okay, maybe hope and change. Hope and change over here means the concept of hope and change, and the idea of hope and change. Okay, and the idea of hope and change. This is where they would differ. That Aristotelian view would say that the future change is an outgrowth of the present reality, meaning that whatever happens, if the sun shines now, then grass is going to grow.
And
If
that is a ripple effect. And our
but not that it's something that we could actually change.
No.
When things do interact.
Right. So I'm not following. I'm just not.
You're not following, okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I guess I'm going on the right-hand side.
This side?
Yes.
Okay.
I love to play games, okay? And to some degree, that involves a gamble,
Okay.
okay? But I won't participate in a game where what I do has no effect on the outcome.
Okay.
So, like, I don't like games of pure chance because I can't affect the outcome in any way.
You could pray.
But if I'm playing cards, I can choose, even with the rules, I can choose to play one card as opposed to another, and that would affect what
Okay.
happens afterward.
So maybe the next section we're going to talk about bitachon, which is more trust in God, because these concepts are perhaps somewhat interwoven, and we'll explain how yes, we do have the power, but at the same time we also have to trust God, and they go hand in hand with each other. Yes.
Future change is all an outgrowth of the present reality, is static.
Right.
And prayer and action is not static.
Right. Okay.
That's the difference.
Right.
One is static and cannot be changed. It
Right.
just flows
It is,
through
right.
nature. And our prayer and action have power, whereas the other has no power.
Right. Correct. And that's what a lot of people believe today. Is that what you were trying to say?
That's fine.
Okay.
Like the 6-day war when the Rebbe told them to put on clothes.
Put on film, right, and that could affect it. Okay. Let's go to the next section. Bitachon. Bitachon means trust. In God we trust. That's why we like American money. Because it says, in God we trust. One of the Rebbes once made a comment that the reason why there's Jews in America is in order to make money to be able to support the Jewish causes. So there is something to it. Because the fact is that, especially, I mean, in the last century, almost all major Jewish causes, I mean, Israel wouldn't be today if not American money, nothing. Anyway, so in God we trust. All others pay cash. That's what they say. Okay, but let's talk about bitachon. Bitachon is a major discussion in the books of Musar and Chakira. One of the things mentioned over here, Chavas Halavavas, the duties of the heart. This is one of the most famous books on bitachon, on trust. So, what is bitachon? One of the most powerful instincts that we have, going back to our days as a child, is that we trust. We trust in certain things and in certain people. You trust your parents. You trust your teachers. Sometimes it may come out that that trust fails you at some point. That does happen, and that could become very difficult. But for the most part, a child trusts. And you believe that your mother, your father will feed you, will take care of you. And you believe that others are giving you the right information, are making the right deals with you, are going to be paying you your paycheck. The idea of trust is something that is inherent within the human nature. But then the ultimate is to trust that our life is divinely ordained. And that everything that happens to us is guided by our Creator towards that purpose. So, let's take a look at text number 9. This is from the Torah, Deuteronomy. Beware lest you eat and be satiated, and you will build good houses and dwell therein, and your herds and your flocks will multiply, your silver and gold increase, and all that you have will increase, and your heart will grow haughty, and you will forget the Lord your God, and you will say in your heart, my ability and the might of my hand have accumulated this wealth for me. Remember the Lord your God as it is, who gives you the ability to make wealth. We've never heard anyone say this. Never heard anyone say, I got myself rich. I worked hard and I got to where I was. Problem is that this is not really what we believe. Now, there's two extremes. One extreme is a self-reliant person. And that self-reliant person, I'm so smart, I'm so great, I got to where I was, and then I'm going to go and make a podcast and tell the whole world how you could become rich by listening to my podcast and clicking the likes so that you'll make me richer by listening to what I'm telling you to do and make the mistakes that I made anyway. But this is the self-reliant person. The self-reliant person says, I'm self-made. Then you have the other extreme. You have the fatalist. The fatalist says, whatever happens, happens. I'm not going to work hard. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit back and like God. It's up to God, right? God has to take care of me. I trust in God, so let Him take care of me. So the fatalist sees very little point in doing anything. So the truth is that both of these are opposites, and both of these don't line up with the Jewish view of bitachon, which is trust in God. Because bitachon says both are wrong. Book of Deuteronomy, according to the Sifri, this is a medrash. You want to know medrash has some philosophy in it too. Because it says, God will bless you. I might think that a person can sit idle. So the Torah teaches us in all that you do. V'recha Hashem elkacha, God will bless you. B'chol asher tasa, in all that you do. Meaning your blessing comes in what you do. You have to make the vessel. You have to make what's called the keli. Sefer HaIkrim, Rabbi Yosef Albo, Text number 11, diligence and effort are useful and necessary in all human actions. This also applies to events in which both the divine decree and human choice play a part, like the grain that is produced by the work of the farmer and the rain. Certainly the work and efforts of the farmer are a necessary condition for the growth of the grain, as the rain, as without the grain, would not grow. Whatever. For this reason, King Solomon praised diligence and says, "The hand of the diligent makes rich, and condemns laziness," in order to urge a person to make all the efforts of their power to obtain their objectives. The psalmist also states, "If God does not guard a city, the watchman's vigilance is in vain." This implies that when God does guard the city and watchman does well to be vigilant, the divine help comes with human vigilance and effort, but not without it. We should therefore exert our efforts in all things as though they were completely dependent on our choice, and God will do as He sees fit. So what he's saying is that both are important. We have to have self-reliance, not self-reliance. We have to have our work. We have to do our part, and we also have to have trust, and we also have to have faith. This is what bitachon is. Bitachon is that we do our part and then trust that it's coming from God. We have to go to work, and we have to do what we have to do, but ultimately the paycheck at the end of the day is not coming because of our boss. It's coming because of the blessing of God. And how do I know? Because the boss in one minute could say, "You're gone." Right? You're gone, I said.
But then you have the incentives behind the job.
And it could be sometimes it's for a good reason. And if you constantly have that trust, then you trust that what happened was for a good reason and for something better that will come out of it.
That's why you hear a lot of people now in business, layoffs are very prevalent, but you hear a lot of them end up, in their opinions, with their position.
Right. Yeah.
Because they need the effort.
Yeah. And we look at life in hindsight, and to hindsight is 20/20, but foresight is always more difficult to see things. Or it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. Yeah.
Once upon a time, I was offered a package to leave long-term employment. And for various...
No, there's truth to what you're saying, because how do you know they're doing the right thing? And the answer is you have to look at how God guides your life. And God is guiding your life in certain ways, and that's how it ends up. Text, yeah.
Isn't that kind of what's happening in Israel, that the very religious Jews will sit and pray, and they don't want to go to war to protect themselves? So there's that academy now of people that want to protect.
Well, you can call it economy, you can call it a partnership. That we need both. We need those fighting on the front lines, those who probably wouldn't be sitting in yeshiva anyway. And we need those sitting in yeshiva and praying for those on the front line. And there are some that do both.
But they're saying the others are wrong. It's not like they're both agreeing.
That's not necessarily the case.
I know you don't want to get into it.
Yeah.
That's what I see as happening.
But Chabad typically is of the opinion that if someone is studying in yeshiva, then they should study in yeshiva. But when they're out of yeshiva, usually after they're done or they get married, then they do go to the military. So we do both, and we understand that both are important. It's not that one is right and one is wrong. Text number 12. A person who trusts in nothing save the ability. A person should trust in nothing save the ability of God. For all means by which a person, this is from Reshit Chachma, for all means by which a person acquires their food, their possessions, their health, and the like, these are all only the causations by which God causes things to reach the person. The author of Duties of the Heart has an analogy for this. This is like a water wheel that raises water from a well by means of vessels that are affixed to it. If one of these vessels are missing, there would be a lack in the water supply. This is how a person should think about the sources of livelihood. The only source of sustenance is God, the unity that transcends everything, and from Him extends all the means and avenues by which our needs are supplied to us. So you have this water wheel, right? You see the spinning water wheel? and it's going and giving water. So the thing is that the water wheel is getting the source from the bottom, from the well on bottom, and then it's bringing it to you. So these are coming, filling up, right? And eventually it's coming to you. Now, if you think that it's only the vessels that are bringing it, well, the problem is if the vessels are not getting it from the water, then there's going to be nothing there. And so this is the example that he's giving, the analogy of the buckets. Now, what we could do our part to bring as many buckets as we can, but we also shouldn't get carried away. So, we're constantly making calculations and saying that, well, if I work harder and if I work longer, then I'll make more money. And if I spend more time, if I'm going to work 150 hours a week instead of just 100 hours a week, then I'll probably make more money. And if I leave my store open on the weekend, well, that's when all the shoppers are coming. How could I close my store on the weekend? And how could I give 10% of what I'm making to charity if I need that 10%? But if we have trust that this is all part of the vessels, that what we have is the vessels, then you can have bigger vessels as well. And based on what a person's needs are, those vessels continue to come. If you have another child in your family, then the vessels grow. And if you have another child in your family, the vessels grow. It's not that instead of thinking how can I have more? How am I going to support it? Well, God gives the blessings according to what a person needs and gives them what they need. And so the vessels are a source of the blessing. Let's read text number 13. The Chavas HaLevavos. We are very behind here. Bitachon, trust in God in all of a person's affairs bring great advantages both religiously and materially. Bitachon engenders absolute loyalty to one's Creator. For one who does not rely on God is by necessity relying on something other than God. The person who trusts in the Almighty is freed of their sustenance to other people. Subservience to other people. This person will cease to pursue others, wait on them, flatter them, and bow to them, other than the service of God. They will not fear animosity of others or be taken back by their opposition, and will be unburdened of the debts incurred by their favors. They will be free to rebuke the guilty without fear or shame, and need not to participate in the conspiracies of their falsehoods. Another advantage for a person who trusts in God: if they are blessed with wealth, they will gladly and generously expedite their financial contributions towards heaven and towards fellows. If they have no riches, they will see in their lack of wealth a kindness from the Almighty in absolving them of the many obligations towards God and society it entails, and from the hassle of guarding and managing it. Thus, the one who trusts God enjoys the benefit of money, which is sustenance, but is free of the worries that the ownership of wealth brings. Their money will not prevent them from trusting in God, as they do not rely on it, but rather see it as a deposit to be used for certain purposes for a certain limited time. If the money stays with them, it will not make them defiant, nor will they demand gratitude from those with whom they are obligated to share it, but will thank the Almighty for using them as a source of charity. And if the money is lost, they will not be paying by its loss, but will thank the Almighty for taking the deposit off their hands and relieving them of the responsibility. These are all religious advantages. Regarding worldly matters, the person who trusts in God enjoys tranquility of both body and soul, and relief from difficult tasks and exhausting labor, from the service of kings and the exploitation of their subjects. They pursue a livelihood, but only a manner that accords ultimate ease to their body, preserves their good name, provides leisure to their heart, and is more consistent with their religious needs and true beliefs. For this person knows that their choice of the material source of their livelihood will not add to their earnings nor subtract from them, save from their doing of God's will. They will have no worries. They are left with unsold merchandise, are able to collect a debt, or illness befalls them, for they know that the Creator manages their affairs and chooses what is best for them, better than they can choose for themselves. And now I'm going to go to the final thing We only have 5 minutes left. I'm going to do this quickly. And that is the idea of controlling our emotions, which is another thing that's talked about here. Controlling our emotions. Let's take a look at Maimonides, Mishnah Torah. The correct path, laws of character. I mentioned this earlier, Hilchos Deos, laws of character. The correct path is a median temperament in which each of the character traits that a person has. The early sages, therefore, instructed that a person should evaluate their traits and direct them along the middle path so as to achieve wholeness. For example, a person should not be overly stingy nor squander their money, but should give charity according to their capacity and lend as is appropriate to one who is in need. A person should not be frivolous and jubilant, nor mournful and depressed, but should be tranquilly happy at all times and with a friendly demeanor. The same applies to all of a person's traits. The path is a path of the wise. And he says, however, the middle path is true. The Orchet Chaim also says, building a character is like cooking a stew. You need greens and meat and water and salt and spices, right? Like a cholent. Too little meat and the broth is thin. Too much salt and it's inedible. When the expert takes from each of the right measure, then the food will be tasty and pleasant for one who eats it. So too with the traits of human character. These are traits of which one should avail oneself in a larger measure, such as the humility and bashfulness and the like, and traits that should be employed only minutely, such as pride and brazenness and cruelty. One who carefully weighs and measures the amount to be taken for each trait will achieve goodness. Now, with regards to how we feel about anger, there are certain traits regarding which a person should not conduct themselves in an intermediate manner, says Maimonides, but should distance themselves to the other extreme. For example, anger is an extremely negative trait from which a person should distance themselves in the extreme and train themselves not to get angry even over things that are worthy of anger. The early sages said, one who gets angry, it is as if they worshipped idols. They also said, one who gets angry is they are a wise person. One who gets angry, if they are a wise person, their wisdom departs from them, and if they are a prophet, their prophecy departs from them. Those who are prone to anger, their life is not a life. The sages therefore instructed to distance oneself from anger. This is the good path. So he says most aspects of your character, you should try and find the middle path. But one exception to that is anger. When it comes to anger, you should not have it at all, because anger is if you worshipped idols. And the question is why? What is about getting angry that is about idolatry? Why is it that it's so bad that we're saying getting angry is so bad? Well, maybe maybe you have what to be upset about. So the reason we'll understand in text 17. This is from the book of Tanya. Our sages said, one who gets angry, it is as if they worshipped idols. The explanation of this statement is that a person who will get angry only because at the time of their anger their faith has departed from them. For if they were to truly believe that what happened to them came from the Almighty, they would not be angered at all. Although a human being possessed of free choice has cursed them or struck them or damaged their property, and this perpetrator is indeed culpable for punishment, both by human courts of law and the heavenly court for the evil of their choice. Nevertheless, the hurt that the one has suffered has already been decreed from above, and God has many emissaries to carry out his will. Furthermore, even in the very moment that the person is striking them or cursing them, this person is being granted existence and life by the divine utterance and vitality that is constantly being invested in them. So what are we saying? That when you go with the concept of bitachon, the concept of trust, so we trust that everything happens by God. And if you believe that everything happens by God, it means everything that happens to you, even through an individual that may have been a nasty person, but that's his problem or her problem. The fact what they did, that's their problem. But the fact that what happened to me, whatever was destined and was meant to happen. And it could have happened a different way. So that person that did it is responsible, but the fact that whatever happened was meant to be for whatever reason. You gave the example before of a person getting fired, and maybe that they got fired because they were supposed to end up in a better place. But if you always have that bitachon, if you always have that trust and faith, then we know we don't control everything we only control what we do. Let me go back for a second. We only control what we choose to. What actually happens is entirely up to God. So our choice in the matter is what we control, not what actually happens. And we see this in a biblical source. We're going to end off with this: the story of Joseph. We all know the story of Joseph. What did Joseph tell his brothers? As we all know the story. Joseph's brothers sold him away as a slave, and he ended up in Egypt. And they finally come back and they see him, and he could have been furious with them, and he could have completely destroyed their lives. All that he wanted was to make sure that they are going to treat Benjamin properly. But aside from that, he didn't demand anything of them. What did he say? Text 18. Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come closer to me." And they drew near, and he said, "I'm your brother Joseph, who you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not trouble you that you sold me here. For it was to preserve life that God sent me before you. God sent me before you to make for you a remnant in the land, and to keep you alive for great refuge. It is not you who sent me here, but God." So he said, you thought that you sold me. But in essence, what really happened? God sent me here. God sent me here. Now, they have to deal with their issue, that they sold away a child. That's a problem, and they have to deal with it. But the idea that what happened to him was meant to be, that is the way it turned out. We're going to conclude today. There's some additional readings that you can look at. You also go to myjli.com/booksmart, and you'll see some more interesting stuff, some more. You could find all this stuff on there. You can find the videos and articles and all kinds of stuff. Next week we're going to talk about Kabbalah and Hasidism. And I just want to tell you, today at 5 o'clock is the men's Hamantash Bake. And for those of you who come to the Wednesday class, there will not be a Wednesday class this week, just so you know. Okay?